I am Laura, a 35-year-old housewife. I have been married to my husband, a company employee, Anthony, for 10 years, and we have a daughter in elementary school. Since my husband works for a trading company and travels frequently, it was tough when our daughter was small, but my doting husband frequently called us via video from his business trips. So our daughter adored her father, and I didn't feel lonely. We were a happy family of 3. However, even in such a peaceful daily life, I sometimes felt depressed. One mom friend constantly harassed me. This mom friend named Candace lived in the same apartment, and our children went to the same kindergarten. We were on the PTA together and had been close for a long time, but something caused her to start hating me. I tried hard to mend our relationship, but her harassment only escalated. One day, she set a terrifying trap for me. The trigger for Candace's hostility was when we bought a house. We had been living in the same rental housing as her, but when our daughter started elementary school, we purchased a new single-family home. We stretched a bit, but living there, we felt it was the right decision. The new house was in an excellent location, close to a supermarket and the station. It also had a large yard where our daughter could play freely. I was grateful to my hardworking husband and determined to work even harder on housework and childcare. But Candace didn't like that she suddenly became cold. When we moved at first, I was confused as I didn't understand why she had changed. We used to visit each other's homes frequently, but she began ignoring my greetings and sometimes glared at me with hatred. I finally understood the reason during our children's entrance ceremony, when I had a chance to talk to her after the ceremony. As I was leaving the school, she whispered in my ear, "Just because you bought a house, you think you're better than everyone else. You're such a smug woman." Then she said, "I thought you were my friend, but I'm disappointed," and walked away being hated by someone I considered a friend. Was shocking. I had never boasted about our new home and wanted to stay friends even after our children started elementary school. So I tried to mend our relationship by smiling and talking to her, but her attitude didn't change. She even started spreading false rumors among other mom friends, saying I was getting arrogant after buying a house and looking down on those who don't own a house. Fortunately, no one believed her, and some friends sympathized with me, saying it's tough having someone like that targeting you. Though the other moms were sensible, I was always anxious about when Candace might spread another rumor, even though I spent restless days. Luckily, my daughter's elementary school had a large number of students, so our children never ended up in the same class. And eventually Candace stopped bothering me. By the time my daughter was in 3rd grade, I had completely forgotten about Candace and regained a peaceful life. But I had underestimated her tenacity. She had been secretly plotting something terrible. One morning, I was cleaning the house after sending my daughter to school. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. When I answered the intercom, I saw 2 uniformed men on the monitor. A police car was parked in front of the house. Why are the police here? I was startled, but calmed myself, thinking maybe there was an incident in the neighborhood, and they were here for an inquiry. I told myself it's okay. There's nothing to panic about, and slowly opened the front door. One of the officers asked, "Is your husband at home?" It seemed they weren't here for me, but for my husband. I started to explain that he wasn't home. My husband is not at home. But then the officer's next words shocked me so much that I almost felt my heart stop. The officer said, "Your husband is suspected of molestation." My husband is suspected of molestation. I shouted involuntarily, but quickly covered my mouth with both hands. If the neighbors found out my husband was suspected of molestation, it would be a disaster. The police said a woman had accused him of touching her inappropriately on a train, but my husband could never do such a thing, so I insisted there must be a mistake. However, the officer said, "If you hide him, you'll be arrested too." I was at a loss, knowing my husband was innocent, when a woman appeared from behind the officers. It was Candace, smirking as she watched us. I thought she was just being a nosy onlooker, but she wasn't ignoring the officers. She barged into the house and said, "If you don't want him arrested, I might consider settling for some compensation money." Apparently, it was Candace who reported my husband for molestation. The officers seemed troubled by her sudden mention of a settlement, but she continued, "I was really scared at that time, and began describing the molestation incident with a pained expression. According to her, she was on a train when someone suddenly touched her. She almost screamed, but recognized the face of the perpetrator, my husband. She thought about turning him over to the station staff, but hesitated since he was her friend's husband. Before she could decide, he disappeared into the crowd at the next station, so she decided to report it to the police later. Then she, with tearful eyes and trembling, pointed at me. Molestation is a heinous crime. Officer, arrest this woman too. Indeed, if she had actually been molested, her fear and desire to catch the perpetrator would be understandable, and if I were hiding the criminal, I might be just as guilty, but her case was different. It's clear my husband couldn't have committed the molestation to fabricate a crime and even act poorly about it. What is she thinking? I resolved to thoroughly expose this lying woman. All right, time to get serious. I won't hold back. I'm sorry to trouble you by coming all the way here, I said to the officers. My husband has been overseas on assignment for 3 years. What, overseas? The officers were dumbfounded. Actually, he had been away from the country for 3 long years. Just after we built our new home, he was ordered by his company to work overseas. The moment I heard about it from him, my world went dark. It's common to hear about people being transferred right after buying a house, but his assignment was overseas. Moreover, it wasn't a country we could easily travel to, and this time it seemed like a long-term assignment, unlike his usual business trips. Although I was used to him being away due to his frequent overseas trips, I was deeply disappointed since our dream home was just completed. However, we couldn't refuse the company's order. I considered moving overseas with our family, but since our daughter had already completed her school enrollment and she had many close friends in the neighborhood, she said, I want to go to school with my friends. So I decided to stay in the country with our daughter. So as soon as we moved into the new house, we started living as just the two of us. Living alone in a large house was initially quite unsettling. However, we communicated with him through video calls almost daily, and thanks to the spacious new home, I was able to enjoy my hobby of gardening. So it wasn't as lonely as I had expected. That's why he has never lived in our new home, having gone overseas 3 years ago. So it's absolutely impossible for my husband to have committed any groping on a domestic train, right? When I said this, both police officers looked puzzled and tilted their heads. Naturally, the most flustered person upon hearing this was the other woman. She exclaimed, That's a lie. It must be a lie that your husband is overseas. I definitely saw him with my own eyes. The culprit is definitely your husband. Her face turned bright red as she shouted. I was boiling with anger at her for still accusing my husband of groping at this point, but with the police involved, proving his innocence was the most important thing. So I said calmly, Shall I call my husband directly then? And took out my smartphone from my apron pocket. There was a high chance he wouldn't be able to answer if he was working, but it was nighttime where he was just around the end of his workday. The police officer still looked troubled, and she had a strained look on her face. But I went ahead and called him on video as I prayed, Please pick up the phone. My prayers were answered when he responded. Immediately seeing his face, I felt relieved and told him everything, that he was being accused of groping, that one of my friends was claiming he had touched her on a train. Initially baffled by the sudden mention of groping, he listened to my story with a frown. But once he saw the police on the video call, he quickly understood the situation. He spoke to the officers. As you can see, I'm not in the country, so I couldn't have committed groping. Then he moved the phone away from his face to show the scenery outside his window. The screen displayed an exotic cityscape and a dark sky, clearly indicating a foreign country. It was obviously not a domestic scene. He then said, If necessary, I can show you my passport. I've been abroad for 3 years. He took out his passport from a nearby bag and showed the stamped pages. He continued, If you still don't believe me, you can investigate further if you like. The police officer, looking apologetic, said, No, that's quite all right. Thank you for your cooperation. When I ended the video call, the officer turned to the other woman with a stern face. So what is the meaning of this? Having witnessed the interaction, she was already pale with wide eyes. She stammered, but I didn't know her husband was overseas. I definitely saw him. Her voice trembled. It was practically a confession. I stepped closer to her and demanded, then why did you think it was my husband? You said you saw him with your own eyes, right? Don't tell me it was a case of mistaken identity. She snapped back. It's all your fault, she yelled, even as the officers looked on in astonishment. You bought a house and acted all high and mighty. Who do you think you are? I thought we were apartment buddies. But you betrayed me. I wanted to make you suffer, so I framed your husband. She ranted furiously. Her selfish words left me and the officer speechless, holding a grudge because I now own a house. She tried to frame my husband for groping, hoping to get settlement money. This was beyond harassment. Fortunately, since he was abroad, we avoided a false accusation. But if he had been in the country and on that train, it could have been disastrous. I've heard that proving innocence is very difficult once accused of groping. False accusations are absolutely unacceptable. However, she didn't understand the gravity of her actions. Despite her rage, she suddenly put on a casual face and said, well, let's say it was my mistake this time. I just wanted to teach a cheeky woman a lesson. I was infuriated by her blatant disregard for decency. I'll see who gets punished. I said, what did you say? She screeched, grabbing at me again. But the police officers restrained her and took her away. Sometime later, her husband came to apologize. He told me that she was arrested for a false accusation and given a suspended sentence. He had been concerned about her bad-mouthing me, but never imagined she would falsely accuse my husband. He was deeply shocked. Tearing up, he apologized profusely. He also declared that he would divorce her. Apparently, she constantly nagged him to earn more and complained about their apartment. He had grown tired of her, and this incident was the last straw. She was now completely alone with no job history and a criminal record. She would struggle in society, but that was her own doing. I was mostly worried about her child, but I learned that the child was now with the grandparents and attending school happily, which was a relief. As for me, nearly having my husband framed by a jealous friend was a close call. Recently, he told me he might return soon. My daughter and I are eagerly awaiting his return, and we plan to continue living happily in our beloved home. Goodbye, everyone. How was this story? Please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.